Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland. I'm continuing my series about international relations between the wars, looking at appeasement these days. 1938. So, that September, the Third Reich had demanded that Sudetenland, a region of Czechoslovakia, be allowed to join the Third Reich. The Third Reich meaning Germany at that time. The Sudetenland had an ethnic German majority. France had a military alliance with Czechoslovakia, but the French were very reluctant to honour this. They desperately wanted to avoid war. The United Kingdom had no alliance with Czechoslovakia, but being a superpower at the time, she interested herself in what was happening all over the world. So the British Prime Minister at the time was Neville Chamberlain, and he'd been in the cabinet in the First World War. He was not someone who was desperate to avoid fighting in any situation, but he would like to avoid a war if at all possible. Moreover, he'd spoken to the chiefs of imperial staff, that's head of the Army, Navy, Air Force, various generals, admirals and air marshals from around the British Empire, not just the United Kingdom. And they said that if the United Kingdom fights a war against Germany at this stage, we will lose. And we must stress the importance of political action to avoid war. Moreover, they saw the possibility of being attacked by Japan in the Far East. So Chamberlain flew to Germany. He'd never been on a plane in his life. These days we're accustomed to prime ministers and presidents jetting all over the world on almost a weekly basis, but it was almost unprecedented at the time for a prime minister to leave the UK during his term of office. 3 successive weekends, Chamberlain flew to Germany to meet with Hitler. The French were represented by Edouard Daladier, their foreign minister. Benito Mussolini went along to mediate. He was the Prime Minister of Italy. You probably know that Italy took the German side in the Second World War. Germany and Italy and Japan were part of the Anti-Comintern Pact. However, Mussolini was not obliged to fight the German side, and he was keeping his options open. France and the UK still wanted to keep Italy sweet. They saw Italy as a possible ally in a future war against the Third Reich. At the very least, Italy could be neutral. They certainly didn't want Italy to join the other side. Anyway, it was noteworthy that Italy did not commit herself to the German side. So they had a verbal agreement on the first weekend, but went back to solidify this in the second weekend. Hitler upped his demands. So they verbally agreed. It wasn't set down on paper the second weekend. They flew back the third weekend, and Hitler upped his demands again. But as you'll see, the French and British caved in. So the United Kingdom prepared for war in September 1938. Reservists were called away from their normal jobs. So the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, all military leave was cancelled. Leave meaning holidays. Trenches were dug in Hyde Park and all sorts of parks, because if the Germans landed by a parachute, they would land on flat land in the middle of cities, parks. People really believed there might be war. Gas masks were issued. There was an evacuation plan for civilians to be evacuated out of cities. The Spanish Civil War was going on at the time. There was a saying by the previous Prime Minister, Stanley Baldwin, the bomber will always get through. And they thought that in a future war, it wouldn't be so many soldiers at the front who were killed, it would be civilians behind the lines who'd be killed by airstrikes in their millions. Now, we know that civilians certainly were killed by airstrikes in the Second World War, but nothing like as many as people imagined. So there were also anti-war agitators. Much of the Conservative Party desperately wanted to avoid war. The British Labour Party, bizarrely, was quite gung-ho, despite having voted down defence spending as much as possible. The Labour Party had gone into the 1935 election promising to abolish the Air Force. No one could possibly fight a 20th century war without an Air Force. The British fascist leader was Sir Oswald Mosley. He held rallies with slogans such as "Mind Britain's Business." He said that Czechoslovakia had never done anything for the United Kingdom, which is true, hadn't existed till 1918. In fact, many Czechoslovaks have been on the enemy side in the First World War because they've been part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Why should the UK risk her neck to save Czechoslovakia? Most people couldn't spell Czechoslovakia or even find it on a map. Even the Prime Minister Chamberlain admitted Czechoslovakia is a faraway country of which we know little. So why should we fight for a country we haven't even heard of? Okay, if in doubt, stay out. And was there not at least a little merit and logic to the German claims? Most Sudeten Germans want to join Germany. national self-determination, let him do it. It's not our problem, even if it is wrong. So anti-war feeling was strong in the UK. It was a majority opinion, almost certainly. There was a very obvious lack of a will to fight. People wanted to give peace every possible chance. The Dominions all voiced their opinion. The Dominions were the self-governing parts of the British Empire: Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, the south of Ireland, and Newfoundland. Incidentally, Newfoundland was not part of Canada until 1949. These dominions had all stood by the mother country in 1914. Okay, Southern Ireland, we hadn't been a dominion in 1914. They had made great sacrifices for the United Kingdom during the First World War. There was little national interest in that for some of the dominions, but no longer. This time, the United Kingdom, if she fights alone. The Dominion government signalled that. The Dominions would not help the United Kingdom. The war was not justified. Peace needed to be given another chance. So the military option appeared to be off the table, as the military expert opinion told Chamberlain, we're going to lose. So he had to find a non-military solution. At the 11th hour, a deal was struck. The French and British would not oppose Germany taking the Sudetenland. They would recognise the annexation as legal. And in return, the Third Reich undertook not to demand any more land. Hitler said, this is my last territorial demand in Europe. In Europe? That left open the possibility of claiming land in other continents. In fact, Hitler seemed to have no interest in other continents. So Chamberlain then flew back to London. He asked his assistant, Alec Douglas Hume, see this document that Hitler and myself signed? Should I show it to the people? And Douglas Hume said, I wouldn't do that if I were you. But nevertheless, when they landed at Croydon Airport, Chamberlain stepped out and greeted a jubilant crowd. He said that he had a piece of paper that bears Herr Hitler's signature as well as his, and he held up and says, it guarantees peace. Peace for our time. And a huge cheer went up. It's often misquoted as peace in our time. Chamberlain told people that Hitler is a man we can trust. So I don't doubt that Chamberlain's sincerity. He was striving to avoid a war in which millions of people would certainly be killed. Is that not a noble endeavour? We're told that you should strive for peace, to give ground, to make painful concessions. I know the concessions were at the expense of the Czechoslovaks, but the UK was under no obligation to Czechoslovakia. There are endless territorial disputes in the world. For example, around this time, the Chaco War was going on between Bolivia and Paraguay. The United Kingdom didn't weigh in on this one. The UK's record against Nazism compares favourably to any other country in the world. It's true the UK had diplomatic relations with Germany at the time and did commerce with Germany at the time. So did everybody else. But it was the United Kingdom and France who declared war on the Third Reich, not anybody else. Anyway, the words seem tragicomic, saying that Hitler's a man we can trust. But those who remembered how horrific the First World War was had no desire to repeat the horrors of war. So Chamberlain was welcomed onto the balcony of Buckingham Palace. So the King and Queen appeared to be endorsing what Chamberlain had done. Ecstatic crowds gathered there. They were overjoyed with relief that bloodshed had been avoided. So it's difficult to remember now that appeasement was extraordinarily popular, and not just amongst the Conservative Party. A newspaper wrote that Mr. Chamberlain is tonight the foremost man in the British Empire, and crowds cheered him to the echo in Downing Street, and he advised the crowd to go home and have a good sleep in peace. The weight lifted from people's shoulders. Disaster was avoided. Anyway, communists held a protest against this. In Trafalgar Square, British communists at their rally denounced the Munich Agreement. One of them dressed up as Hitler and held up a piece of paper saying, I promise to be a good boy. They were satirising the gullibility of Chamberlain. And one British Tory who thought Chamberlain had brought shame on the country was Enoch Powell, then a professor in Australia. So Enoch Powell was actually an anti-Nazi before it was fashionable. Only a year before, the French communist leader Maurice Thoré had said that the French proletariat will not be tricked again into slaughtering their German brothers, as they'd done in the First World War. Because some people said this would be a war in the interest of capital. Douglas Hume, that was Chamberlain's assistant, he went on to be Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary in that order. So Chamberlain thought that Hitler was utterly loathsome, but in politics one simply has to deal with such people. That's the nature of the beast. Neville Chamberlain also ordered massive rearmament. His planned tax cuts were shelved to pay for beefing up the military. In future, the United Kingdom would be sufficiently equipped to stand up to the Third Reich. The UK had done a bit of sabre rattling. Had it not been for that, perhaps the German demands would have been even more extensive. So the Germans demanded that the Sudetenland be evacuated by the Czechoslovak army, and it was done. Their message was, we're going to take over the Sudetenland. We can do this easy way or the hard way. The French and British have made it absolutely crystal clear they will not come to your aid. In either case, thousands of Czechoslovaks would die. So the German troops moved into the Sudetenland, and they were greeted with delight by the throng. Hitler was only moving into his own backyard again. So it was very popular in Germany too. It was a bloodless victory. So Hitler's argument of national self-determination was valid in this case. The Czechoslovak president, Edvard Beneš, thought he had no choice but to cave in. He was not going to make his people fight in a war that they were certain to lose. What good would that do if tens of thousands of people had been killed and the result would have been the same anyway? So Beneš retired as Prime Minister. He went to live in the United Kingdom. He was replaced by Emil Hácha.